It hasn't been a very good few days for Ted Cruz since the Planned Parenthood terrorist attack, where 3 people, including a police officer, were killed by a white, American born, anti Obama, anti abortion terrorist. And Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz was one of the first people who spoke out of the presidential candidates after that terrorist attack at Planned Parenthood. He said he was, quote, praying for the loved ones of those killed, those injured, and first responders who bravely got the situation under control in Colorado Springs. In a campaign event on Sunday, he actually called the murders horrific and wrong. Well, that all sounds pretty good, right? Except that it has now been revealed that shortly before the shootings, none other than our buddy Ted Cruz promoted the endorsement of an activist who has called for the execution of abortion providers. We have a link on the YouTube video for this clip from Ted Cruz's own website touting the endorsement of Troy Newman. If the Ted Cruz campaign hasn't figured out they're going to want to scrub that. They may have removed it by now, right?
Yeah, I would hope so. It's been there's been some outrage.
In his book, Their Blood Cries Out, Troy Newman wrote the following. Let's take a look at this quote. In addition to our personal guilt in abortion, the United States government has abrogated its responsibility to properly deal with the blood guilty. This responsibility rightly involves executing convicted murderers, including abortionists, for their crimes in order to expunge blood guilt from the land and people. Instead, the act of abortion has been elevated to a God-given right, and the abortionists canonized as saints. Consequently, the entire nation has the blood-red stain of the lives of the innocent upon its head. That is from Troy Newman's book, Their Blood Cries Out. Now, Newman is kind of backtracking, saying that that entire book was just a theological study. His writing was not actually advocating of any violence. Yeah, when people actually do what you suggest, you say, oh, that's not at all what I was suggesting. But we know it's BS. And you know how we know it's BS? Because if Troy Newman was really against the murder of abortionists, he wouldn't have put out a press release in 2003 where he criticized the conviction of Paul Hill for murdering an abortion doctor. Paul Hill murdered a Florida abortion doctor, was convicted, and Troy Newman argued in a press release that, quote, there was no justice because the court prevented him from presenting the legal defense that his conduct was justifiable defensive action. So according to Newman Lewis, it shouldn't be a crime to kill an abortion doctor because the abortion doctor is killing the fetus, and thus killing an abortion doctor is self-defense of a third person. That's the argument from the guy who now is backtracking, saying, listen, I'm not really talking about killing abortionists.
Yeah, that's the problem with religious texts and people's interpretation of them. It's pretty easy to go back and say, that's not really what I was talking about.
Right.
You know, you could look at it this way, you could look at it that way. But if you're saying stupid things and throwing this stuff out there, people are going to listen to it. People are going to draw their own conclusions.
Right.
And if those people own guns, well, I suppose bad things can happen.
And don't forget that the same Republicans who claim to be mourning the victims of the Planned Parenthood terrorist attack are the same Republicans who were promoting fake videos about Planned Parenthood allegedly selling baby parts or saying we need to stop abortion by any means necessary. And now we're supposed to believe they're actually the good guys. And lastly, I'll remind you that this is the same Ted Cruz who stood on stage in support of a pastor named Kevin Swanson who advocates the killing of all homosexuals. So this is not at all an outlier with regard to Ted Cruz.